I think that ties into a case that that Hansen describes like early in his book, where the Salem witch trials were not the first time that Cotton Mather became aware of a kind of witch situation in New England, because there was a guy named John Goodwin whose several children became started exhibiting these systems in 1688, like a few years before the Salem trials. And I guess, that he also mentions the Arc de Cercle, which I looked up, and honestly kind of reminds me of the Jeffrey Dahmer victim, and also the headless statue in Tony Podesta's house, the Arch of Hysteria. It's almost exactly the same, but anyways, but yeah, there were things like that. He mentions elsewhere. I think later on there were in the book that there were levitation claims during Salem, but in this John Goodwin case, Cotton Mather was a medical student at the time, and he actually went and I think he brought some of these children into his home after a certain point to study them, and he left behind a lot of notes and things like that, and genuinely, like, he was more focused on helping them recover from this kind of curse or possession or whatever than he was trying to hunt down the sickos who did this, which I guess, would maybe change later. But he mentions a few things like, he said, yea, their heads would be twisted almost round. It sounds exactly like The Exorcist. And crawling on the ceiling, doing the Arc de Cercle in a weird way, not being able to speak, or speaking in weird kind of dissociative, almost like multiple personalities kind of stuff. And, the person that was arrested in that case was Anne Glover, who was an Irish woman who was a housekeeper of John Goodwin, right? And in the summer of 1688, Martha Goodwin, who was 13, accused Anne Glover's daughter of stealing, well, I'm reading from the Wikipedia, so take this with a grain of salt. He accused Anne Glover's daughter, who also worked for them, of stealing laundry. This caused Anne to have a fierce argument with Martha and the Goodwin children, which then supposedly caused them to become ill and start acting strangely. The doctor who was called suggested it was caused by witchcraft, because he could not offer another diagnosis or heal the children. And that was also a thing that Hansen mentions, which is like doctors commonly in the 17th century would diagnose things they couldn't explain with perhaps it was witchcraft. So that was like really kind of normal. And Hansen talks about, Goodwife Anne Glover, who was, I think, the last person to be hung for witchcraft in Boston. And eventually, I think, maybe got, so she was actually hung before the Salem witch trials began, but was the last person in Boston proper to be hung there. And I don't know. I mean, there was there was evidence brought into the court.
That was very point. I think he calls it like the most clear-cut case of witchcraft. Yes, he says, this is with goat's hair in them.
Yeah, he says there has never been a more clear-cut case of witchcraft, because they found several small images or puppets or babies made of rags and stuffed with goat's hair and other such ingredients. And he says the image magic is the commonest form of black magic. The impulse behind it survives even when belief in magic is gone, as anyone knows who has torn up the photograph of a person with whom he was angry. College students are obeying the same impulse when they hang or burn someone in effigy, and it is worth noticing that hanging and burning were the means of executing witches. What is most important is that her witchcraft plainly worked, and in no indiscriminate fashion. When she tormented one of her dolls, one of the Goodwin children fell into sad fits. When it is remembered that in a society which believes in witchcraft, the violent hysterical symptoms to which the Goodwin children were subject not infrequently terminate in death, it cannot be said that the Boston court acted either harshly or unjustly. Indeed, when one considers the ferocity of 17th century English law, simple hanging seems almost a lenient sentence.
Word. Okay.
But you know what though? When Glover was on her way to the gallows, she announced that the children's afflictions would not cease at her death because others had a hand in the witchcraft as well as she, and the afflictions did indeed continue.
Well, yeah, I guess his idea is that, like, if when witchcraft works, if these malicious occult activities actually have an effect, like it is pretty, evil to do them. I don't know. That's quite
regardless
a bold,
of the.
yeah.
I mean, that's again another strong parallel to Grover Furr. Was like every single one of these people was absolutely guilty.
Well, he does say that a lot of it. Like there was one like little child, like I think Dorcas, who died. I forget what her last name was. Dorcas Good.
Wait, was the 5-year-old executed?
Yeah, she was executed.
Okay, yeah.
That was
a little problematic.
Yes.
And I guess
if only Cotton Mather had been there to stop the madness. But
yeah, well, I mean, there were a couple. Well, Cotton Mather was kind of around this at the time, but he was in medical school, and
Cotton Mather was involved with the Glover thing, but in that case, he had to do it. It was
he did say that when she came into his home that he observed flying, not in a way that was not in a way that she would like fly off into the air like a bird, but that she could like jump extra kind of high and like it was at a level that was kind of physically impossible for a human, but she could kind of like lift up in the air and like levitate a little bit for like a moment and stuff like that. So he ended up being basically, I guess he saw his kind of a point of interest in all of this was because he was kind of an ideological opponent of the so-called Sadducees, the sort of not really materialist, but like materialist for their time. He thought that this was maybe a golden opportunity to kind of get into the evidentiary record, like a real case of like witchcraft, like a real like witch conspiracy going on. And if he could kind of, study the symptoms and all these other things, that he could basically convince these, Sadducees these doubters out here that in fact the spirit world existed. Because, like we said, the other people, even though they were still Christians, were kind of doubting this idea that there was like a spirit world, and that basically that witches, even though pretty much everybody believed that they existed to some degree, they believe they obviously can't do anything because there is no kind of spirit realm that they can call on. And Mather strongly disagreed with that, but he wasn't saying like, "Hey, let's go, just like execute everybody," and all that stuff. He still believed that you had to take a kind of prudent approach to investigating. He
definitely believed in the crime of witchcraft, as most people did, but he was definitely like a more restrained person. And like it's actually similar. It's interesting that Goodwife Glover was Irish and really couldn't even speak English and really just spoke Irish and had to like have a translator.
Well, that was I was gonna mention like that's how she actually got sentenced to death, and I think maybe we could say that like maybe not the best jurisprudence ever. They basically asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer, and I guess I don't know, the way Hansen describes it is that she did start doing it. She did start saying the Pater Noster, but then like couldn't get past like certain lines in it, and like as hard as she tried, she couldn't bring herself to say these words. But if you look on Wikipedia, here we go through the looking glass, and it says, well, she was seen as a scandalous old Irish woman, very poor and a Roman Catholic, and obstinate in idolatry, which is, I guess, what Cotton Mather said about her. But I think they're kind of doing a thing there where it sounds like they're saying that because she's a Catholic, she's like a devil worshiper, which maybe he, like low-key, had a bias against Catholics, but they're almost making it seem like a one-to-one. I think he's talking about all the magic she
does say that she couldn't recite her Pater Noster,
this website it
said she could not repeat it if she might have all the world. So
exactly,
yeah.
But of course, it's written.
She had some kind of like block or whatever happening,
That's what the impression I get from Hansen's book. But then when you read the summary on Wikipedia, it says, at her trial, it was demanded of her to say the Lord's Prayer. She recited it in Irish and broken Latin, but was unable to say it in English. So. And then there was a belief that an inability to recite the Lord's Prayer was the mark of a witch. And, so that's kind of saying like, oh, like there they go again. They're, basically that because she couldn't speak English, she was declared, guilty, even though that when Hansen describes it in more detail, the context of that is different. It's not simply, it sounds like they're just being like kind of like mean to like this Irish lady and kind of saying, huh, well, you can't say it in English. That's proof. And almost like in a very, deliberately like mendacious kind of way, finding a little trick to do that she can't, attest that she can't pass. Yeah, but the investigation,
yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the drowning thing or whatever. Yeah. But really there is like a whole thorough investigation and all this stuff, suggesting that she practiced witchcraft was like discovered, including these dolls stuffed with like goat hair, and like spittle being applied to them and things like that. That's like kind of a lot in a way.
Yeah, but, and I think that I mean, she basically kind of she gave many pronouncements that basically kind of implied that like she implied that she was under some kind of pact where like she could not say the words.
She wasn't tortured or anything, right? But
no, I don't believe so.
She still basically said that she served the devil.
Yes, and then called out that like because there's like a conspiracy of witches, the torment of these children will go on after my death. That doesn't sound like the words of a wrongly accused person.
It doesn't.
Like, regardless of whether or not you think she like actually affected those things on them, it sounds like she thought that she affected those things on them, or was maybe quote unquote crazy or something like that. I noticed here though, this Wikipedia article that's quite slanted kind of tells on themselves a little bit, because they do admit that there are several statements as testaments as to her final words. Yeah, it even says here, when she was taken out to be hanged, she said that her death would not relieve the children of their malady. There are several statements as to her final words. According to some, she said that the children would keep suffering because she was not the only witch to have afflicted them, but when asked to name the other witches, she refused. Another account says that Glover said that killing her would be useless because it was someone else who had bewitched the children. Either way, Anne Glover did believe in witches. Now here's the important part. A Boston merchant who knew her, Robert Calef, said that, quote, Goody Glover was a despised, crazy, poor old woman, an Irish Catholic who was tried for afflicting the Goodwin children. Her behavior at her trial was like that of one distracted. They did her cruel. The proof against her was wholly deficient. The jury brought her guilty. She was hung. She died a Catholic.
Wow.
Robert Calef, what are you doing hanging out with Anne Glover?
Wow.
What are you doing, man? Because
was this
as
guy
we'll see,
Catholic? Because that would explain a lot. Like the way he said she died a Catholic, kind of made him seem like he. It says on his Wikipedia article that he might have attended a dissenting academy, which would make him a Protestant, but it was weird that he would be like, she died a Catholic.
She died a Catholic. And so it's like worth noting, I think maybe we've mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned him once or twice, but Robert Calef almost became the sort of like the Trotsky to like Cotton Mather Stalin in a way. Like if one had not like ordered the assassination of the other right after these trials, because they both lived for a while after that, and they basically, it was Robert Calef, who was a wealthy cloth merchant in Boston, who kind of launched the first of a series of kind of diet of denunciations of the Salem witch trials, and particularly had it out for Cotton Mather, who he was I think the first person to sort of put Cotton Mather at the heart of this judicial conspiracy to wrongly accuse people of witchcraft.
We need a heroic pro-Cotton Mather Wikipedia editor to step up, because the Robert Calef article is also very slanted. It says, Mather, unsurprisingly, refuses to directly address many particulars of Calef's book, but rather accused Calef of being a follower of Satan and uses select quotes from the Bible intended to put the merchant Calef in his place, including Exodus 22:28. Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But we read from his replies, and that's not the tone that he took with him. He was like, you're injured if humble servant, like he was like, please, like, let me provide a fuller account of like, and like he gave all this testimony to what happened, like, so there's an incredible anti-Mather slant in the Wikipedia article.
The lies, the lies of the Calefites.
Yes,
basically.
Wow, talk about a real Khalif or an evil Khalifa, probably in league with ISIS.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.